He never believed in God. From a young age, he learned that faith was just an invention, a comfortable illusion for those who fear the end. He grew up rational, cold, and proud of his own logic. He mocked everything that couldn't be proven. For him, death was simple, an eternal blackout, without pain, without consciousness, without return. But what happens when someone so skeptical faces their own end? What if, for 3 minutes, he dies and discovers he was wrong? Very wrong. What he saw on the other side cannot be explained by science, nor erased from memory. A supernatural revelation that turned his soul inside out. If you enjoy true stories that challenge everything we know about life and death, subscribe now. Leave a like if this narrative captivates you and share it with those who need to hear that maybe the end isn't the end. It was supposed to be just another ordinary night, the starless sky like a black veil covering the deserted road. He drove alone, his headlights cutting through the darkness like blades. The loud music in the car muffling any thought, that's how he liked it. No silence, no reflection, just speed and distraction. The clock read 2:17 a.m. He yawned but didn't slow down. His fingers drummed on the steering wheel, keeping time with the music, when, without warning, everything changed. A pair of headlights appeared out of nowhere, and an out-of-control truck veered into its lane. There was no time to brake. The impact was sharp, violent, and the end result was the sound of metal twisting that echoed like a scream trapped between worlds. The car spun in the air before colliding with the asphalt, becoming an unrecognizable heap of iron, glass, and blood. The first to arrive were the paramedics, and one of them, seeing the scene, murmured, "There's no way anyone could have survived." But as per protocol, they tried, removing the body with difficulty. It had no pulse, no breathing. The dilated pupils indicated that he had been clinically dead for 3 minutes. But what nobody knew was that he was still conscious, not in his body anymore, somewhere else. He saw himself floating above the scene, observing everything with impossible clarity. He saw his own body, lifeless, being pulled from the wreckage. He saw the tense faces of the rescuers and heard phrases that no one would ever repeat to him. And then something pulled him. It was like falling without ground beneath his feet, a plunge into the unknown. The road lights disappeared and the siren faded. Everything went dark, but it wasn't ordinary darkness. It was alive, dense, as if it had eyes. He tried to scream, but he had no mouth. He tried to run, but he had no legs. He was only conscious and afraid. It was at that moment that he realized death was not the end. It was the beginning of something he never believed in. And what came next was nothing like he expected. The feeling was one of judgment, not through words but through presence. As if something or someone was about to reveal a truth he had spent his entire life denying. And when that presence drew near, he knew there was no more escape. Time, eternity no longer existed there. It had already begun. The darkness didn't come like ordinary gloom. It had weight, it had presence. It was as if space itself had been ripped away, leaving only a conscious nothingness. He couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't touch, but he felt. He felt that he was somewhere and that this place knew him better than he knew himself. There was no time, no body, only a consciousness floating in a silent abyss. And in that silence, something began to move, no longer physically within him. A profound unease, as if he were being watched by invisible eyes. Eyes that did not judge, but revealed. He tried to remember his name, his story. But everything seemed distant, as if it had been erased. The skepticism that had accompanied him throughout his life now seemed fragile, childish. Because there, in that void he knew, there was something beyond. Something that didn't need to be proven. Something that simply was. The temperature dropped not like the cold of winter, but like a thermal void, where even the soul seemed to freeze. And then, he heard not with his ears, but with his spirit. A deep, grave sound like an ancient lament. It was as if the universe itself were weeping for him. It was at that moment that the darkness began to slowly open like curtains being pulled back by invisible hands. And from the middle of nowhere, a light emerged, weak at first, but growing. A light that did not blind it illuminated. And with it came a presence. It wasn't a physical figure, it was a strong, serene, immense essence. He felt he was standing before something sacred, something that transcends religions, dogmas, cultures, something that didn't need to be explained, only felt. The light drew closer, and with it, a peace he had never experienced. A peace that did not depend on circumstances but on truth. And then, He saw not with his eyes, but with his soul. A human form, enveloped in light, a gaze that transcended dimensions. A face that carried pain, love, and eternity. It was Jesus. Not the Jesus of churches and paintings, but the Jesus who dwells in the invisible. Who knows every thought, every choice, every hidden tear. And in that instant the young man knew everything he had denied was there, alive, present, and real. And before he could speak, Jesus looked at him. And in that look, everything was there. Forgiveness, purpose, and an invitation. The light was not merely brightness, it was consciousness, and it pulsed as if breathing. And at its center, a figure began to form. It was not made of flesh, but of essence. A man, enveloped in a presence that blended authority and compassion. He didn't need to say who he was. The young man knew it was Jesus. But not the Jesus of cold statues or distant sermons. This was the Jesus who knew every detail of the human soul. His eyes did not judge, they revealed. And when the young man tried to look away, he realized there was nowhere to run, because there, everything was true. Without words, Jesus began to show him, as if opening windows to eternity. The young man saw his life projected before him. Every choice, every lie, every moment he ignored the silent call of faith. There was no condemnation, only clarity, and that clarity hurt more than any punishment. He saw the days when he mocked those who believed. The moments when you laughed at the idea of soul, of purpose, of God. And then, he saw something he never imagined. The unseen consequences. People he could have helped, paths he never walked, and a future that was aborted by arrogance. Jesus didn't speak, but his presence said it all. It was as if each ray of light was a question. Why did you choose to live without me? The young man tried to justify himself. He thought of arguments, of logic, of science. But there, none of that mattered, because before eternity, what counts is not what you prove, it's what you live. And then Jesus showed something even deeper, a glimpse of what his life could have been. He saw himself as a transformed man, touching lives, inspiring others, living with purpose. He saw tears of gratitude on faces he had never met and felt what it is to live meaningfully. The pain was intense, but it wasn't physical. It was existential. The pain of having wasted time, the pain of having lived as if everything were by chance. And when he thought it was too late, Jesus approached. With a look that mixed sadness and hope, he said, not with his voice, but with his spirit, "You still have time if you want." And in that instant, the young man understood. Faith isn't about religion. It's about choice, and he was facing the greatest choice of all. Time seemed suspended, and the young man, still enveloped in the light emanating from Jesus, felt stripped of everything he believed himself to be. There were no masks, no excuses, only him and the truth. And this truth didn't shout it, whispered with a force that tore at the soul. Jesus did not accuse him. There was no anger in his gaze. But there was something even more devastating, compassion. A compassion so pure that it exposed, without words, how far he had strayed from what truly mattered. And it was in this silence that the revelation began. Images appeared before him, like windows opening onto realities that never existed, but could have. He saw himself helping a friend who, in real life, took his own life. He saw himself embracing his mother at a moment when, out of pride, he had ignored her. He saw himself saying, "I forgive you," to someone he chose to hate. Each scene was an echo of what could have been if he had believed. And then, the deepest revelation. He saw the impact his disbelief had on others. Young people who admired him, who followed his skeptical example. People who were on the verge of faith, but recoiled because of the cold words he presented as absolute truths. He didn't just deny the light, he extinguished candles around him. The pain was unbearable, not as punishment, but out of conscience. He realized that living without faith was not just a personal choice. It was a seed he had planted in others, and now he saw the harvest. Jesus then extended his hand, not as a judge, but as a father. And in that gesture, there was a silent question. "Do you want to come back?" The young man hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of unworthiness. How could someone who had denied everything be accepted back? But Jesus didn't expect perfection, he expected surrender. And in that instant, the young man understood. Faith isn't about deserving, it's about accepting. The light around him began to pulse. He felt as if he were being pulled back. But before leaving, Jesus said, not with a voice, but with his presence, "Take this with you and live differently." And then everything disappeared. The cold, the light, the presence. He was returning, but not as the same man. The sound of the heart machine returned like thunder, one beep after another. And then a sigh. The doctors exchanged incredulous glances. He was back 3 minutes after being declared dead. The young man opened his eyes, but they weren't the same eyes. There was something different, something that medicine couldn't explain. The hospital lights seemed pale compared to what he had seen before. The nurses' worried faces seemed distant. He didn't speak, only stared as if trying to understand if it was real or if he was still there. The following days were silent, and he didn't tell anyone what he had seen. Not out of fear of not being believed, but because he was still trying to understand. Like someone returning from a place that doesn't exist on maps. A place that can't be measured in coordinates but in truths. Gradually he began to change, not dramatically, but through gestures and choices. In silence, arrogance gave way to humility, cold logic to a search for meaning. He began to see people with different eyes that knew that each soul carries an invisible story. He returned to places he had previously avoided and spoke with people he had previously ignored. He asked forgiveness from those he had hurt, and he began to seek not a religion, but a connection. Something that transcended the physical, something that resembled what he saw in those he met. The experience didn't turn him into a preacher, but rather into someone who lives with purpose. Someone who understands that each day is a gift, that eternity doesn't begin after death, it begins now in the choices we make. He was never the same again, and although many doubt him, he doesn't try to convince anyone. Because he knows, the truth doesn't need defending, it just waits to be found. And when someone sometimes asks what happened that night, he just smiles. A slight, but deep smile. And he says, I died, but it was there that I began to live. If this story touched you in any way, then you need to be here with us. Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any of the upcoming experiences that reveal what exists beyond life. Leave a like if this journey made you reflect. Your participation is what keeps this channel alive, and each story told here is an invitation to look beyond what the eyes can see. And if you found this experience intense, wait until you discover other stories here on the channel that also tell tales like the one you just saw and heard. Prepare to immerse yourself in other realities, because here, each story is a whisper of the invisible and incredible.